They mocked me for being a waitress until I inherited the restaurant chain. For decades, she carried trays, wiped tables, and smiled through the whispers. The whispers that said she was nothing more than just a waitress. But the night they laughed the loudest, a shocking truth was revealed. Behind her apron hid a secret so powerful it would turn her world and theirs upside down. Suddenly, the woman they mocked stood on the edge of a fortune, a legacy, and a fight she never asked for. Because not everyone was ready to let her rise. Jealous rivals, family doubts, and a ruthless enemy would stop at nothing to strip her of the life she never thought she'd have. From the cafe floor to the courtroom, every step forward brings betrayal, heartbreak, and the chance to prove them all wrong. She was once invisible. Now the spotlight is on her. But the question is, when the whole world turns against you, can kindness and faith be enough to win it all? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Sunnyside Cafe, casting golden light across the checkered tile floor. Caroline Miller glided between tables with the ease of someone who'd walked this path thousands of times before. 40 years had taught her hands to balance 3 plates of steaming pancakes while her right elbow steadied a coffee pot. "Morning, Dr. Peterson. Extra syrup. Just how you like it." Caroline set down a stack of blueberry pancakes in front of the elderly doctor who'd been coming in every Friday since before her hair had turned silver. "You're an angel, Caroline." He beamed up at her, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Don't know what I'd do without you remembering all my little preferences." Caroline squeezed his shoulder gently. "That's what I'm here for." She pivoted toward the next table, where Mr. Whitman waited for his usual black coffee and wheat toast. Her worn sneakers made no sound against the floor, another skill learned through decades of early mornings and late nights, carrying the weight of other people's hunger. At the corner booth, 3 young women in business attire tapped on their phones, barely glancing up when Caroline refilled their cups. "Can you believe she's still doing this?" one whispered, not quite quietly enough. "My grandmother's the same age, and she's enjoying retirement in Florida." "Must not have planned very well," another replied with a small smirk. "Imagine being a senior citizen still waiting tables." The third girl at least had the decency to look embarrassed, shooting Caroline an apologetic glance. Caroline's smile remained fixed in place as she moved away, though something sharp twisted in her chest. She'd heard it all before. Just a waitress. Still a waitress. Only a waitress. The words shouldn't sting anymore, but they did. "Don't you listen to those girls," Dottie whispered as Caroline passed the counter. At 70, Dottie had been serving alongside her for nearly 20 years. "They don't know what it takes to raise a child alone and keep a roof over your head." Caroline nodded, grateful for the support. "It's fine. I've got Emma's graduation dinner tonight. That's all that matters." "The lawyer's family going to be there?" Dottie asked, knowing all about Susan's in-laws and their country club memberships. "All of them," Caroline sighed. The Prestons wouldn't miss a chance to show off. The morning rush continued, a dance Caroline knew by heart. She remembered which customers were rushing to work and needed quick service, which ones were lonely and needed conversation, which ones had dietary restrictions they were too shy to mention again. In between orders, she wiped tables, refilled salt shakers, and helped Mr. Harlan Pierce, the cafe's owner, count the morning's earnings. Mr. Pierce watched her work with a quiet thoughtfulness that Caroline didn't notice, too busy ensuring everyone else's needs were met. By 3 o'clock, her shift was ending. Caroline's back ached as she untied her apron in the staff room. Emma's graduation dinner was at 7. The Prestons had chosen some fancy place downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and wine lists longer than the menu. In the cramped bathroom, Caroline studied her reflection. The fluorescent light was unforgiving on her lined face. She tucked a strand of graying hair behind her ear and applied a touch of the lipstick she kept in her purse for special occasions. "You raised a daughter who became a nurse. You have a granddaughter graduating with honors," she reminded herself quietly. "That's something to be proud of." But as she straightened the collar of her best blouse, the memory of those young women's whispers echoed in her mind. Tonight she'd sit across from Susan's in-laws in their designer clothes, feeling their judgment with every polite smile. Caroline squared her shoulders. For Emma, she could endure anything. The valet at Bellamy's took Caroline's 20-year-old sedan with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, the one she'd bought 3 years ago for Susan's birthday dinner, and took a deep breath before walking through the restaurant's heavy oak doors. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. The quiet murmur of conversation mixed with the delicate clink of wine glasses. Caroline clutched her small purse tighter, suddenly aware of how her shoes, polished but worn, looked against the plush carpet. "Grandma!" Emma's voice cut through the elegant atmosphere. Her granddaughter waved from a large round table in the corner, her graduation cap resting beside her water glass. Her smile was radiant, genuine, in a room full of practiced pleasantries. Caroline made her way over, accepting Emma's fierce hug with a swell of pride. "You look beautiful," Emma whispered. "Not as beautiful as you, sweetheart." Caroline touched her granddaughter's cheek. "I'm so proud of you." Susan nodded from her seat, offering a tight smile. Beside her, her husband Richard Preston and his parents already had wine in their glasses. Mrs. Preston's diamond necklace caught the light as she leaned to whisper something to the woman next to her. "Caroline, we saved you a seat." Richard gestured to an empty chair. She settled in, noticing the elaborate place setting with more forks than seemed necessary for one meal. Emma squeezed her hand under the table. The waiter appeared, handing Caroline a menu without prices. Her stomach tightened. "We've already ordered appetizers for the table," Mrs. Preston announced, not quite meeting Caroline's eyes. "Richard, pour Caroline some wine." The conversation flowed around her. College plans, Emma's scholarship, Susan's promotion at the hospital. Caroline added comments when she could, but felt increasingly invisible as the meal progressed. During the main course, one of Richard's colleagues from the law firm leaned across the table toward Emma. "Your grandmother must be thrilled about your pre-med track. First doctor in the family?" "Grandma's always been my biggest supporter," Emma replied warmly. The man glanced at Caroline. "And what do you do, Mrs. Miller?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Preston's sister Julia cut in with a laugh. "Caroline's a waitress. 40 years carrying plates at that little diner downtown. What's it called again? Sunny something?" "Sunnyside Café," Caroline said quietly. Julia raised an eyebrow. "Can you imagine, at her age, still wearing an apron and taking orders? I suppose we all make our choices in life." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled around the table. Susan stared at her plate. "My grandmother works harder than anyone I know," Emma said, her voice steady but sharp. "Of course, dear," Julia replied, patting Emma's hand. "No shame in honest work, though I always say, aim high, or why aim at all?" Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks. The expensive food turned to ash in her mouth. Across the table, she caught Mrs. Preston whispering behind her hand, eyes flicking toward Caroline's worn hands with their practical short nails. "Excuse me," Caroline murmured, placing her napkin beside her half-eaten meal. "I need some air." Emma half rose. "Grandma, I'm fine, sweetheart. Enjoy your celebration. I'll be back in a minute." Caroline walked with measured steps through the restaurant, chin up despite the burning behind her eyes. Outside, the night air cooled her flushed face. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. "Caroline?" She turned to find Mr. Pierce standing nearby, his aging frame silhouetted against the restaurant's golden windows. In his weathered hand, he held a small wrapped package. "Harlan, what are you doing here?" He stepped closer, concern etching deeper lines around his kind eyes. "I need to speak with you, privately. Could you spare a moment?" Across the street from Bellamy's, a small park with wrought iron benches offered refuge from the restaurant's oppressive elegance. Caroline sat beside Mr. Pierce under the amber glow of a street lamp, her hands still trembling slightly from the humiliation inside. "You didn't finish your dinner," Mr. Pierce noted, his voice gravelly with age, but warm with concern. Caroline managed a small smile. "Some appetites aren't worth keeping." The old man nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd always been observant, noticing which customers needed extra attention, which employees were struggling. In 40 years, he'd never missed much. "You know, Caroline, I've owned restaurants for over 50 years now." He gazed at the darkened trees, their leaves rustling in the gentle evening breeze. "Started with just that little cafe. Built it up, added another, then another." "You've done remarkably well," Caroline said. 22 locations now, isn't it?" 22. He chuckled. "And you know what I've learned after all this time? Buildings don't make restaurants successful. Menus don't. Fancy decorations don't." He tapped his chest. "It's heart. Always has been." A moth fluttered around the street lamp above them, casting erratic shadows across the pavement. "I've watched you, Caroline. 40 years. You've never been late. Never turned away a hungry person who couldn't pay. Remember that family whose house burned down? You fed them for weeks." Caroline looked down. Anyone would have done the same. "No." His voice hardened. "They wouldn't. That's exactly my point." He shifted on the bench to face her directly. His eyes, though clouded with cataracts, held a fierce clarity. "You've been the soul of Sunnyside all these years. When customers come back, it's not for my pancake recipe. It's for the way you remember their children's names. The way you slip extra bacon to the widower who eats alone every Tuesday. A lump formed in Caroline's throat. Harlan, that's very kind, but I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. He placed the small wrap package in her hands. Open it. Caroline carefully peeled back the paper to reveal a small wooden box. Inside lay an old-fashioned key with an engraved tag. The future. I don't understand, she whispered. Mr. Pierce took a deep breath. I have no children, Caroline. No family left. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. Oh, Harlan, no. He raised a hand. I've made peace with it. But I needed to make peace with something else too. What happens to everything I've built? He gestured to the key. Last month I changed my will. I've named you, Caroline Miller, as the sole heir to my entire restaurant chain. All 22 locations. The night air seemed to vanish. Caroline couldn't breathe. That's impossible. I'm just a waitress. You've never been just anything, Pierce said firmly. You deserve this more than anyone else in the world. But I don't know how to run restaurants. The managers, the staff, they respect you more than they ever respected me. He patted her hand. The paperwork's done. My lawyers will contact you when. He didn't finish the sentence. The drive home passed in a blur. Caroline moved through her small apartment like a sleepwalker, replaying Pierce's words in her mind. Her fingers kept returning to the key in her pocket, cold metal that somehow burned with possibility. She stood at her kitchen window, gazing at the night sky. Somewhere between the sting of the dinner's humiliation and the shock of Pierce's revelation, a small, daring thought took root. What if everything was about to change? Caroline flipped the sign to open as dawn broke over Main Street. For the 100th time that week, her fingers brushed against the key in her pocket. Mr. Pierce's impossible gift, still feeling like a dream. The morning routine anchored her, brewing coffee, setting out fresh cream, wiping down counters that already gleamed. Outside, early birds gathered the construction crew that arrived at 6:15. The teachers from Jefferson Elementary, old Mr. Watkins, who'd been having the same breakfast for 23 years. The bell chimed as Martha, their cook, rushed in with tears streaming down her face. Martha, what's wrong? It's Mr. Pierce. Martha's voice cracked. His housekeeper found him this morning. He passed in his sleep. The coffee pot slipped from Caroline's hands, shattering against the tile floor. Black liquid pooled around the ceramic shards, but she couldn't move to clean it. When? The word barely escaped her throat. Sometime last night. Peaceful, they said. Caroline steadied herself against the counter. He'd known, of course. That's why he'd given her the key. Why he'd chosen that moment to tell her. But 6 months had become 1 week. The café transformed as news spread. Customers who'd come for eggs and gossip stayed to share stories about the gruff old man who'd built a restaurant empire from a tiny breakfast joint. Regular patrons brought flowers that accumulated by the register. Someone taped a photograph of a young Harlan Pierce to the wall, apron-clad, sleeves rolled up, standing proudly before the original Sunnyside. Caroline moved through the day in a fog, pouring coffee and serving plates while memories washed over her. Pierce teaching her how to balance 4 plates on one arm, grumbling about the price of butter, surprising a young mother with a birthday cake for her child. At 3 o'clock, Martha touched her shoulder. You should go. The lawyer called. They're reading the will at 4. The law office of Bradshaw. Sons occupied the 2nd floor of the town's oldest brick building. Caroline sat stiffly in an uncomfortable chair, surrounded by people she barely knew, restaurant managers, business partners. The nephew from Boston who'd visited twice in 20 years. Mr. Bradshaw, white-haired and solemn, cleared his throat. Mr. Pierce was quite specific about his wishes. I'll begin with the personal effects. Caroline half listened as various items were distributed: a watch to his barber, fishing gear to a longtime supplier, a small trust for his housekeeper. The nephew leaned forward each time, then sank back, disappointed. Now, regarding Sunnyside Enterprises, Incorporated, which includes all 22 restaurant properties, associated equipment, accounts, and holdings valued at approximately $12 million. The nephew straightened, a satisfied smile forming. Mr. Pierce has left the entirety to Caroline Miller, with the instruction that she continue to feed both bodies and souls with equal measure. The room erupted. The nephew leapt to his feet, face contorted. That's impossible. She's nobody, just some waitress. Mr. Pierce was of sound mind when he signed these documents last month. Bradshaw continued calmly, witnessed by myself and 2 partners. Caroline couldn't breathe. The key in her pocket seemed to pulse against her thigh. This is outrageous, the nephew sputtered, pointing at Caroline. She manipulated a sick old man, I'll contest this. You can't give an empire to a woman who spent her life carrying trays. Actually, Bradshaw said, sliding a folder toward Caroline, that's exactly what Mr. Pierce did. Caroline stood frozen, the folder in her hand suddenly heavy as lead. This couldn't be real. $12 million? 22 restaurants? She'd been proud to save enough for Emma's college fund after years of pinching pennies. The door crashed open. Victor Pierce strode in, his tailored suit and slicked-back hair looking out of place in the modest law office. His eyes locked onto Caroline, narrowing into cold slits. So this is her? The waitress? Victor's voice carried the polish of expensive schools and East Coast connections. I came as soon as I heard the absurd news. Mr. Bradshaw rose. Mr. Pierce, we've already begun the proceedings. I'm sure you have. Victor circled Caroline like a shark, his cologne overpowering in the small room. Tell me, how exactly does a coffee-pouring nobody convince a business titan to hand over his life's work? Caroline clutched the folder tighter. I didn't convince him of anything. No? 40 years working for my uncle and suddenly you're his only heir? What was it playing nursemaid? Telling him how special he was. Old men are so vulnerable to a woman's attention. Heat flushed through Caroline's body. Mr. Pierce was my employer and my friend. Friend. Victor laughed, glancing around the room as if sharing a joke. My uncle had no friends. He had business associates and employees. He certainly didn't have some gray-haired waitress as his confidant. Mr. Bradshaw cleared his throat. Mr. Pierce specified his reasons quite clearly in a letter accompanying the will. I'm sure he did. Victor snatched the letter from Bradshaw's hand, scanning it with theatrical disbelief. Loyalty, kindness, understanding the soul of the business. He tossed it back. This is dementia talking, not my uncle. The other restaurant managers shifted uncomfortably. One, a balding man who ran the downtown location, stood up. Victor, your uncle made his decision. Caroline's been the heart of Sunnyside for decades. The heart? Victor's voice dripped with contempt. We're talking about restaurants, not a charity. She probably can't even read a profit statement. Caroline's fingers trembled. I may not have a business degree. May not? Did you even finish high school before starting to wait tables? Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. My uncle built an empire from nothing. He understood business, finance, growth. What exactly do you understand beyond refilling coffee cups? The room fell silent. Caroline thought of all the families she'd watched grow up in her cafe, the celebrations she'd witnessed, the grief she'd shouldered with regulars who became friends. That was the business Mr. Pierce had built, not just food, but community. I understand people, she said softly. Victor snorted. People don't pay the bills. He turned to address the room. Let me make this absolutely clear. I am contesting this will. My legal team will prove my uncle was not of sound mind when he made this unfortunate decision. He jabbed a finger toward Caroline. Enjoy playing restaurant owner while you can. I'll see you in court where we'll find out exactly how you manipulated a dying man. The door slammed behind him, leaving a vacuum of silence. Caroline sank into her chair, the folder sliding from her hands to the floor. Everything had happened so fast. Mr. Pierce's revelation, his death, this inheritance, and now, a legal battle she couldn't possibly afford to fight. Mrs. Miller? Bradshaw's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? She wasn't. For the first time in decades, Caroline Miller was truly afraid. The familiar bell chimed as Caroline pushed open the cafe door the next morning. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with legal terms she didn't understand and numbers too large to comprehend. But work had always been her anchor, the place where things made sense. Today felt different. The usual morning bustle continued, clinking silverware, sizzling griddles, the coffee machine's steady hum, but as Caroline reached for her apron, she noticed how conversations hushed when she passed. Glances darted her way before quickly turning elsewhere. Morning, Harry. She greeted her longtime regular at the counter. The usual? Harry, who told Caroline about his children's birthdays and his wife's passing over 15 years of breakfast, barely looked up from his newspaper. Just coffee today. She poured his cup, noticing the headline on the local paper. Waitress inherits Pierce restaurant fortune. Nephew claims manipulation. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. Quite a windfall you've got there, came a voice from the booth behind her. Two women, weekend regulars, huddled over their phones. Always thought she was sweeting on old Pierce. Guess it paid off. Can you imagine? 40 years pouring coffee just waiting for the payoff. Caroline pretended not to hear, moving mechanically between tables. Some customers were kinder, offering congratulations with genuine smiles. But others studied her with new, calculating eyes, as if she'd been wearing a mask all these years that had suddenly slipped. Mid-morning, Susan called. "Mom, are you okay? I'm seeing all these comments online." "I'm fine," Caroline lied, ducking into the break room. "Just busy. Victor Pierce gave an interview claiming you took advantage of a man with early dementia. It's all over social media." Caroline's throat tightened. "Mr. Pierce was sharp as a tack. You know that." "Of course I do, but—" Susan paused. "People are saying awful things. Even the Hendersons shared that interview, and they've known you for years." The rest of the day passed in a fog. Linda, the morning cook who'd worked alongside Caroline for 2 decades, avoided the usual banter. When Caroline asked about her son's baseball game, Linda just shrugged. "He lost. Anyway, I'd better get these orders up." By closing time, Caroline's smile felt painted on. She mechanically wiped down tables, counted the register, and sent the last staff member home. For the first time in years, she felt like a stranger in her own café. She slid into a corner booth, the same one where Mr. Pierce had sat every Thursday for his chicken pot pie, and carefully removed her apron. The white fabric was spotted with coffee stains and frayed at the edges from countless washings. She folded it neatly, running her fingers over the embroidered Sunnyside Cafe logo. "Was this all I was meant to be?" she whispered to the empty restaurant. "Just a waitress?" For 40 years, that title had been enough. She'd found dignity in remembering orders, in comforting the grieving widow with extra pie, in slipping a free meal to the college student counting pennies. She'd never wanted millions or power. Now, with everything suddenly within reach, the world had decided she didn't deserve it. Caroline stared at her weathered hands resting on the folded apron. Mr. Pierce had believed in her. But sitting alone in the darkened cafe, surrounded by whispers and suspicion, she wondered if she truly was worthy of his faith, or if she was, as Victor claimed, just a coffee-pouring nobody who'd stumbled into something far beyond her depth. Caroline stood on Susan's porch that Sunday, a homemade apple pie balanced in her hands. She'd been baking since dawn. Kneading dough had always cleared her mind. The familiar motions were comforting when everything else in her life felt upside down. Susan opened the door with a practiced smile. "Mom, you didn't have to bring anything." 40 years of never showing up empty-handed isn't a habit I can break," Caroline said, stepping into the immaculate foyer. Susan's home was everything Caroline's modest apartment wasn't: spacious, professionally decorated, with framed diplomas and certificates lining the hallway. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Talk of Emma's upcoming college plans and the unseasonably warm weather filled the awkward silences. Caroline noticed how Susan's husband Robert kept checking his phone, probably reading the latest gossip about her inheritance. It wasn't until coffee that Susan finally broached the subject. "So, have you thought about what you'll do? About the restaurants?" Caroline set down her cup. "The lawyer says we need to wait until the court decides about Victor's challenge. But if you win—" Susan hesitated. "Mom, running 22 restaurants isn't like managing the breakfast shift." "I know that. Do you?" Susan leaned forward. "There's payroll, suppliers, marketing, property taxes." "I understand it's different," Caroline said, her voice tightening. "I'm just worried. You've never even balanced a company checkbook. Those restaurants employ hundreds of people." Caroline felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I've been watching Mr. Pierce run that cafe for 40 years. Watching isn't the same as doing." Susan's voice softened with what Caroline recognized as pity. "Maybe you should consider selling. You'd still have plenty to retire on." "So you think I can't do it either?" "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." Caroline folded her napkin precisely. "You're embarrassed. You always have been of my uniform, my sensible shoes, the smell of coffee that never quite washes out." Susan's face fell. "That's not fair, isn't it? When you were in high school, you told people I was in restaurant management. You never once brought your friends to the cafe." "Mom, please. I put you through college with those tips people think I didn't deserve. I worked doubles when your father died so you could stay in that private school." Caroline's voice cracked. "I was never ashamed of being just a waitress." Robert cleared his throat. "Caroline, Susan's only thinking practically. The business world can be cutthroat. And diners can't?" Caroline stood. "I've handled drunk customers, broken equipment, and staff no-shows while still getting food on tables with a smile. Don't tell me I don't understand responsibility." She gathered her purse. "I should go." "Mom, don't leave like this," Susan pleaded. "I need some air." Caroline headed for the door, disappointment weighing heavier than anger. As she reached for the handle, Emma appeared beside her. "Grandma, wait." She wrapped her arms around Caroline's waist, the embrace tight and fierce. Then she leaned close, whispering in Caroline's ear, "I believe in you, Grandma. You've got this." Caroline hugged her back, a single tear escaping despite her best efforts. She squeezed Emma's hand and slipped quietly into the evening, those 5 words echoing with each step toward home. The manila envelope arrived with Tuesday's mail. Caroline's hands trembled as she tore it open, legal documents spilling onto her kitchen table. Bold type jumped from the page, notice of will contest, and temporary injunction. She sank into a chair, scanning pages filled with accusations. Victor Pierce claimed she had exerted undue influence over the deceased, that she was mentally unfit to manage such extensive holdings, and that Harlan Pierce had been of unsound mind when making her his heir. Her phone rang, startling her. "Miss Miller, this is Alan Winters, the corporate attorney for Pierce Restaurant Group." Caroline clutched the phone tighter. "I just got the papers." "I expected as much. Victor's lawyers aren't wasting time." His voice was steady, matter of fact. "There's a board meeting tomorrow at 10. You should be there." "A board meeting?" Caroline's mouth went dry. "But I don't know anything about. The executives need to meet you. You're potentially their new owner." He paused. "Wear something professional." After hanging up, Caroline stared at her closet. Among the practical slacks and comfortable shoes sat one navy blue suit she'd bought for Susan's college graduation 15 years ago. It would have to do. The next morning, Caroline stood outside Pierce Enterprises headquarters, a gleaming 12-story building she'd passed countless times without ever imagining she'd enter. At the reception desk, she nearly introduced herself as just Caroline, catching herself at the last moment. "Caroline Miller, I'm here for the board meeting." The young receptionist's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Yes, Miss Miller. 18th floor, conference room A." The elevator ride felt endless. Caroline studied her reflection in its mirrored walls, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her suit. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Stand straight, Caroline. God made you to look the world in the eye." The conference room doors were already open when she arrived. 8 people in expensive suits turned to stare. A silver-haired man rose from the head of the table. "Miss Miller, welcome. I'm Richard Thornton, CFO." He gestured to an empty chair. "Please join us." Caroline took her seat, painfully aware of curious eyes assessing her. Victor sat directly across from her, his smile razor-sharp. "How nice of the waitress to join us," he said. "I trust you found the coffee station without assistance." Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Caroline met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Pierce, I've served coffee to senators, CEOs, and once a movie star." She smiled. "I'm quite familiar with how it works." For the next 2 hours, Caroline listened as they discussed profit margins, expansion plans, and supply chain issues. Terms like market saturation and quarterly projections washed over her. She took careful notes, determined to look up every unfamiliar word later. When asked her opinion on menu changes, she spoke carefully. "In 40 years, I've watched which plates come back empty and which return half full. I know what our customers want. That knowledge matters." By meeting's end, 2 executives had begun addressing questions directly to her. Small victories. That night, exhaustion bone deep, Caroline knelt beside her bed as she had every night since childhood. The hardwood floor pressed against her knees, a familiar discomfort. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this fight. Those people in that room, they see right through me." Her voice caught. "Victor's right. I'm just a waitress." She closed her eyes, tears sliding down weathered cheeks. "But you made me this way. You put me at that café for 40 years. If this is where you want me now, I need your strength, not mine." Her fingers tightened around her worn Bible. "Help me stand tall tomorrow, and the day after, and however many days this takes." Caroline remained kneeling long after her prayer ended, drawing courage for the battle ahead. Caroline woke before dawn the next morning, her mind racing with legal terms and business jargon she'd struggled to understand. She dressed in her familiar uniform crisp white blouse, black slacks, comfortable shoes that carried her through 8-hour shifts. The routine brought comfort when everything else felt uncertain. She arrived at Sunnyside Cafe an hour early, needing the solace of its familiar walls. The newspaper box outside caught her eye. Her name splashed across the front page. "Waitress claims millions in contested will." Caroline unlocked the door with shaking hands. When she flipped on the lights, she froze. The cafe wasn't empty. "Surprise?" a chorus of voices called out. At least 20 people stood inside waitstaff, cooks, busboys, and regular customers. A hand-painted banner hung across the back wall. "We stand with Caroline." Tears sprang to her eyes as Beth, a fellow waitress, stepped forward and wrapped her in a tight hug. We heard about the legal mess. We're not letting you face this alone. Tom, the grumpy short-order cook, who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, stepped forward. You backed me when I needed rehab. His voice was gruff. Never forgotten that. Ellen Jenkins, a widow who came for breakfast every Tuesday, squeezed Caroline's hand. Remember when my Harold died? You sat with me every morning that first month. Wouldn't take a penny for all that coffee. One by one, they shared stories. Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks as decades of small kindnesses were recalled in vivid detail. When my car broke down, you loaned me money for repairs, said Miguel, the dishwasher. You helped my daughter apply for college, added Mary Thompson, a regular for 15 years. Frank, a retired police officer, cleared his throat. You kept my coffee cup full through my divorce. Never asked questions, just listened. Caroline hadn't realized how many lives she'd touched. These moments had been natural to her, just what people did for each other. Nothing special. Robert Chin, their accountant and a daily breakfast customer, stepped forward with a stack of papers. I've organized a petition. Everyone signing to show support for Mr. Pierce's decision. He smiled. And I've collected statements from customers about your character. The lawyers said it might help. Lois, who'd waited tables alongside Caroline for 25 years, handed her a thick envelope. We took up a collection. It's not much, but it might help with lawyer fees. Caroline opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Beth pulled out a chair. Sit down before you fall down, honey. Caroline sank into it, overwhelmed. For the first time since the will reading, the knot in her chest loosened. She looked around at these people, her people who saw her worth, when she couldn't see it herself. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. I never expected. That's because you give without expecting anything back, said Ellen. But kindness has a way of returning. Caroline wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Thank you, all of you. Outside, morning light began to filter through the windows. Soon they'd open for the breakfast rush. The legal battle still loomed. Victor's accusations still stung, and the board meeting had left her feeling inadequate. But looking at these faces determined, loyal, kind, Caroline smiled through her tears. She wasn't fighting alone. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Caroline smoothed her new navy blazer for the 5th time, feeling like a child playing dress-up. The conference room of Mitchell, Abernathy Law offices stretched before her, all gleaming mahogany and intimidating leather chairs. 3 people waited inside Mr. Mitchell, her attorney, Miss Reeves, a financial advisor, and Mr. Barton, the restaurant chain's chief operating officer. Caroline gripped her notebook tighter and stepped through the doorway. Ah, Miss Miller, right on time. Mr. Mitchell gestured to an empty chair. We have a lot to cover today. She settled into the seat, spreading her materials before her, a brand new legal pad, and 3 sharpened pencils arranged in a perfect row. Let's begin with the quarterly profit and loss statements, Miss Reeves said, sliding a thick folder across the table. You'll need to understand these before next week's hearing. Caroline opened the folder and blinked at columns of numbers. Profit margins, operating expenses, depreciation. Words she'd heard, but never fully grasped, swam before her eyes. The EBITDA for the eastern locations shows a 4% increase. Mr. Barton explained, pointing to a spreadsheet. But the debt-to-equity ratio is concerning, especially with the new property acquisition. Caroline's mouth went dry. I'm sorry, the what ratio? The 3 exchanged glances. Debt to equity, Miss Reeves repeated slowly. It measures financial leverage and risk. Heat crept up Caroline's neck. She jotted down the term, adding a question mark. Perhaps we should start with the basics, Mr. Mitchell suggested. For the next 3 hours, they walked her through financial statements, legal terminology, and management hierarchies. Caroline's hand cramped from taking notes. Each time confusion threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the faces at the café that morning, people who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. And the amortization schedule for the loans, Miss Reeves continued. Wait, Caroline interrupted. Could you explain that again, in plain English? Instead of irritation, she saw something like respect flicker in the advisor's eyes. Of course, it's how we spread out loan payments over time. Caroline nodded. Like when I helped my daughter budget for her house payments? Exactly like that, just on a larger scale. By mid-afternoon, Caroline's head throbbed. They'd covered more information than she could possibly absorb. Yet, beneath the confusion, she felt something unexpected, a tiny spark of confidence. The restaurant business wasn't so different from what she'd done for 40 years. Customers, quality, costs, care. The principles were the same, just the scale was different. When they finally finished, Mr. Mitchell walked her to the elevator. You did well today, Caroline. She laughed. I felt like I was drowning, but you kept swimming. He smiled. That's more than most would do. At home that night, Caroline spread the materials across her kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped Emma with homework, where she'd paid bills by lamplight after late shifts, where she'd cried after her husband died. She made a cup of tea and settled in. One by one, she reviewed the financial terms, testing herself with flashcards she'd created. Amortization, she murmured, spreading loan payments over time. Her eyelids grew heavy as the clock ticked past midnight. The numbers began to blur. She told herself just 5 more minutes, just one more concept. The morning sun found Caroline still at the table, head resting on an open ledger, pencil loose in her fingers. A half-drunk cup of tea sat cold beside her, but her face, even in sleep, held the peaceful determination of someone who refused to give up. Caroline poured coffee for Mrs. Jenkins, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. The morning rush had just begun when Hank Morris burst through the cafe door, newspaper clutched in his fist. Caroline, have you seen this garbage? Her stomach dropped. What is it? Hank slapped the Riverdale Gazette on the counter. There on the front page, Pierce's nephew challenges Waitress inheritance. She's just after the money. Caroline's fingers trembled as she picked up the paper. Victor Pierce's handsome face stared back at her, confident and polished in an expensive suit. Miss Miller is a simple waitress with no education in business management, Victor was quoted. My uncle was 84 years old, and clearly not in his right mind when he wrote that will. What would a woman who spent her life carrying plates know about running a multi-million-dollar restaurant chain? This is naked opportunism. The words burned into her like brands. Simple waitress. No education. Not qualified. The bell above the door jingled. 3 customers entered, immediately falling silent when they spotted her. One whispered something to another, and they glanced her way before choosing a table far from the counter. Don't you pay that man any mind, Hank said, patting her arm. Everyone knows you, Caroline. But did they? The doubt in the customer's eyes told a different story. Throughout the morning, Caroline felt stares following her. Some regulars made a point of being extra friendly, which somehow made it worse. By lunchtime, she'd overheard snippets of conversation. Always seemed nice, but you never know. And what business does she have running restaurants? During her break, she called her lawyer. We expected this, Mr. Mitchell said calmly. Victor's trying to sway public opinion before the hearing. We can issue a statement. No, Caroline interrupted. I won't stoop to his level. After hanging up, she stared at her reflection in the restroom mirror. The same lines around her eyes, the same gray-streaked hair she'd had last week. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. When her shift ended, Caroline locked up the cafe and stepped into the cool evening air. She paused to adjust her purse strap when voices drifted from around the corner. I'm telling you, she manipulated that old man, a man's voice said. My cousin works at the bank, says Pierce was confused those last months. Perfect time for someone to take advantage. That's not fair, Dale, a woman replied. Caroline recognized Margaret from the hardware store. I've known Caroline Miller 30 years. She's the most honest person in this town. Then why is she suddenly claiming millions she didn't earn? Being nice doesn't qualify you to run businesses. She earned it through loyalty and hard work. More than that spoiled nephew ever did. Come on, she's a waitress. What's she going to do? Serve coffee at board meetings? Caroline backed away silently, hot tears blurring her vision. She hurried down the street, keeping her head down. At home, she locked the door and finally let the sobs come. Everything Victor said echoed what she'd feared herself. What right did she have to this inheritance? Was she fooling herself? Caroline sank onto her sofa, the newspaper still clutched in her hand. Her tears fell onto Victor's smirking face, smudging the ink. All those years of quiet dignity, of doing her job with pride and care, reduced to this, just a waitress, reaching above her station. She had never felt more alone. The boardroom of Pierce Restaurant Holdings felt like a courtroom to Caroline. 12 executives in press suits sat around a gleaming mahogany table, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. She smoothed her department store dress, wishing she'd splurged on something more impressive. As interim CEO, I've called this meeting to discuss transitional operations, said Howard Benson, the company's silver-haired CFO. Until legal matters are resolved. You mean until we determine if Miss Miller is actually qualified to inherit? Interrupted Richard Cole, head of development. His gaze slid over Caroline like she was a problematic menu item. Caroline clutched her water glass, fighting the urge to apologize for her presence. Harlan Pierce made his wishes clear. Howard continued. We should respect. Respect doesn't grow profit margins. Richard cut in. No offense, Miss Miller, but this company needs experienced leadership, not. His hand waved dismissively in her direction. A knot formed in Caroline's throat. The newspaper article had done its damage. Actually, I disagree completely. All heads turned toward the voice. A young man in his 30s with warm brown eyes and a confident posture leaned forward. His name placard read, Daniel Rivera, Regional Operations. What we need is exactly what Miss Miller brings to the table, Daniel continued. I've spent the past week reviewing our customer satisfaction metrics across all 22 locations. Our numbers have been slipping for 3 years. He tapped his tablet, and charts appeared on the wall screen. Sunnyside Café, where Miss Miller works. Highest customer loyalty in the entire chain. Highest staff retention. Highest repeat business. Caroline blinked in surprise. I visited there myself undercover. Daniel's eyes met Caroline's. In 30 minutes, I watched her remember 15 customers' names, ask about someone's sick mother, and comp a meal for a young couple who were clearly counting pennies. Richard scoffed. That's charity, not business. That's connection, Daniel countered. That's what Harlan built this company on and what we've been losing. I've worked my way up from dishwasher to this table. I know the difference between managers who see people as profit centers and those who see them as human beings. The room fell silent. Caroline stared at this stranger, defending her with such conviction. Miss Miller may not have an MBA, Daniel said, but she understands what matters most to our customers. Compassion isn't weakness, it's our competitive advantage. A few heads nodded. Even Richard looked thoughtful. I propose we vote to support Miss Miller's leadership during this transition, Daniel said. Let's show her what we do, and let her show us what we've forgotten. The vote passed 7-5. Not unanimous, but enough. After the meeting, Caroline found Daniel in the hallway. Why did you do that? She asked. He smiled. My grandmother was a waitress for 40 years. Best person I've ever known. He handed her his card. Call me any time you need backup. I meant every word I said in there. Driving home that night, Caroline rolled down her window, letting the cool air wash over her face. Stars glittered above, vast and bright. For the first time since the will reading, she felt something shift inside her, not just the weight of doubt, but a flicker of possibility. Daniel Rivera had seen value in her that had nothing to do with family loyalty or friendship. He'd seen her life's work and called it strength. Maybe, just maybe, she belonged at that table, after all. Caroline arrived at the Sunnyside Cafe before dawn, as she had for decades, but today felt different. She unlocked the door as owner, not employee. The weight of her new keyring still felt strange in her palm. She flicked on the lights and paused, seeing the familiar space with fresh eyes. The worn counter, the faded menus, the cracked vinyl booths, all suddenly hers to change or keep. The thought terrified and thrilled her. First things first, she murmured, heading to the kitchen to prep for the morning rush. By 7, the staff had arrived, eyebrows rising in surprise as they found the break room table laden with a hot breakfast, scrambled eggs, pancakes, fresh fruit. What's all this? Asked Darlene, a waitress of 15 years. Caroline smiled. Staff meal, every shift from now on. But Mr. Pierce never... I know, Caroline interrupted gently, but I remember being a single mom, stretching every dollar. Sometimes I'd skip lunch to save money. Not anymore, not for any of us. Word spread quickly. The kitchen staff emerged from their stations, faces brightening at the unexpected gesture. Eat up, Caroline urged. We serve others better when we're taking care of ourselves. The next week, Caroline introduced a golden hour discount for seniors between 2-4 p.m., when the restaurant typically sat empty. She remembered how many elderly customers counted pennies, ordering only coffee when she knew they were hungry. 15% off everything, she announced, posting a cheerful sign by the register, and unlimited coffee refills. By the third day, every booth filled during those hours. Retired couples, widowers, elderly neighbors who previously ate alone now gathered together, creating a community where once there had been only empty tables. You're cutting into profits, Richard Cole warned during their weekly conference call. Daniel Rivera's voice countered. Actually, overall revenue is up 8% at Sunnyside. The seniors bring friends, buy dessert, and come back more frequently. Caroline smiled into the phone but said nothing. The numbers were speaking for her. Her boldest move came next. Every Monday night, traditionally their slowest evening, she started community table dinners. One long table, communal seating, a simple fixed-price meal. Singles, new residents, and anyone wanting company could come break bread together. The first night, only 7 people showed. The second week, 15. By the fourth Monday, they needed 2 tables. "This is the first time I've eaten with company in 3 years," an elderly man told her, eyes misting. "Since Martha passed." Caroline squeezed his hand. "You're welcome at our table any time, Henry." As word spread, managers from other Pierce restaurants began visiting, taking notes. 3 locations asked to implement their own versions of community table. 1 month after her first changes, Caroline closed the cafe at 9 p.m., exhausted but content. She'd proven to herself that kindness and business could coexist. The parking lot was nearly empty as she walked to her old Buick. She stopped short, spotting something on the windshield, not a ticket, but flowers. A small bouquet of daisies and carnations tied with simple twine. Caroline looked around, but saw no one. She picked up the card nestled among the blooms. "From someone whose life you changed with your kindness. 10 years ago, you paid for my family's Christmas dinner when my wallet came up short. I never forgot. Now I own 3 restaurants of my own. Thank you for showing me what leadership truly means." The card was unsigned. Caroline held it to her heart, tears brimming. She hadn't remembered that Christmas dinner, that family, that small gesture. But someone had. And that, she realized, was the true legacy of Harlan Pierce, not the buildings or bank accounts, but the ripples of kindness that continued long after the moment had passed. The courthouse loomed before Caroline like a fortress. Its stone columns and towering steps seemed designed to intimidate ordinary people like her. She smoothed her navy dress, the only formal outfit she owned, and took a deep breath. "Ready?" Daniel stood beside her, along with Mr. Lester, the silver-haired attorney the board had hired. "As I'll ever be," Caroline replied, clutching her worn purse with white knuckles. Inside, the courtroom's polished wood and formal atmosphere made her heart race. Victor sat at the opposite table, immaculate in an expensive suit, whispering to his team of lawyers. He caught her eye and smirked. Susan and Emma slipped into seats directly behind Caroline. "We're here, Mom," Susan whispered, squeezing her shoulder. The bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Harriet Dawson entered. A stern-faced woman in her 60s, she surveyed the room with practiced neutrality before nodding for everyone to be seated. Victor's lead attorney, Mr. Grayson, rose first for opening statements. Tall and imposing, he approached the bench with confident strides. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. Harlan Pierce, in his declining mental state, was manipulated by his longtime employee into changing his will. Miss Miller," he gestured dismissively toward Caroline, "lacks any qualifications to run a multi-million-dollar business. She has no education beyond high school, no management experience, and clearly took advantage of an elderly man's loneliness and confusion." Caroline's face burned. Each word landed like a slap. When her turn on the witness stand came, her legs wobbled as she approached. After being sworn in, she sat, folding her hands to hide their trembling. "Miss Miller," Grayson began, pacing like a predator, "in the 40 years you worked at Sunnyside Café, how many times did Mr. Pierce promote you to management?" "Never," Caroline answered truthfully. "Not once in 40 years. Grayson let the words hang. "And your formal business education consists of?" "I don't have one, but a simple answer will suffice," he cut her off. "No business education whatsoever. Yet, somehow, you expect this court to believe Mr. Pierce genuinely wanted you to run his life's work?" Mr. Lester objected, and Judge Dawson instructed Grayson to allow Caroline to finish her answers. "Miss Miller," Grayson continued, "how many private meetings did you have with Mr. Pierce in the months before his death?" "Just the one, after my granddaughter's graduation." "Really? Witnesses say you were often alone with him after closing." Caroline's brow furrowed. "We sometimes talked while I finished cleaning, but that was just normal conversation." Hours passed as Grayson twisted her words, making innocent actions sound calculated. By afternoon, Caroline's mouth was dry, her head pounding. Finally, Mr. Lester had his turn for questioning. "Caroline, why do you think Harlan Pierce chose you as his heir?" She paused, looking down at her weathered hands. "Mr. Pierce told me I understood what the restaurants were really about, taking care of people. He said money and fancy degrees don't teach that. And in your 40 years, what did you learn about the business?" "Everything," she said simply. "I watched it grow from 1 cafe to 22. I saw what worked and what didn't. I know our customers, our staff, our community. I may not have a degree, but I know the heart of this business." When court adjourned for the day, Judge Dawson announced proceedings would continue through the week. Caroline's shoulders slumped with exhaustion as she gathered her things. "You did wonderfully," Emma whispered, embracing her. Caroline nodded, throat tight with emotion. They hadn't won today, but she'd spoken her truth. And somehow, that felt like its own small victory. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the final day of proceedings. Caroline sat with rigid posture, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The past week had drained her completely. Victor's accusations, the scrutiny of her character, the constant questioning of her worth. She felt naked, exposed in ways she never imagined possible. Susan squeezed her shoulder from the row behind. Daniel and several cafe staff filled the benches alongside regular customers who had rearranged their schedules to be present. Even Mrs. Abernathy, the cranky widow who ordered the same breakfast every Tuesday for 30 years, sat dignified in her Sunday best. Judge Dawson entered, and the room fell silent. In the matter of the estate of Harlan Pierce, the judge began, her voice carrying clear authority. This court has carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented. Caroline held her breath. Across the aisle, Victor leaned forward with a smug half-smile. The court finds no evidence of undue influence or manipulation. Mr. Pierce was of sound mind when amending his will, as confirmed by his physician and attorney. Judge Dawson looked directly at Caroline. Furthermore, Mr. Pierce's detailed letter explaining his decision shows clear, rational intent. Victor's smile vanished. Therefore, this court upholds the will as written. Caroline Miller is the rightful heir and owner of all properties and businesses formerly belonging to Harlan Pierce. For a moment, Caroline couldn't process the words. Then a collective gasp gave way to cheers. Susan wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders. Emma jumped up and down in the aisle. Order, Judge Dawson called, though a hint of a smile played at her lips. This court is adjourned. Victor stormed out, his attorneys trailing behind. Caroline stood shakily, overwhelmed by the hands reaching to pat her back, the voices congratulating her. You did it, Mom, Susan whispered, tears streaming down her face. No, Caroline replied, her voice thick with emotion. We did it. Outside the courthouse, Caroline blinked in the bright afternoon sunlight. News cameras appeared, reporters shouting questions. Mr. Lester steered her through the crowd to make a brief statement. I just want to honor Mr. Pierce's memory by taking good care of the restaurants and the people who make them special, she said simply. By evening, word had spread throughout town. When Caroline arrived at the cafe to collect some paperwork, she found the lights on and the parking lot full. Surprise! Dozens of voices shouted as she pushed open the door. The cafe had transformed. Streamers hung from the ceiling, tables overflowed with food, and a hand-painted banner read, Congratulations, Caroline. Someone had brought a portable stereo playing cheerful music. We couldn't wait to celebrate, Daniel explained, guiding her inside where Emma presented her with a lopsided cake decorated with Our Boss Lady in blue frosting. Tears filled Caroline's eyes as she looked around at the faces of people who had stood by her waitresses, who had adjusted their schedules to attend court, cooks who had testified to her character, customers who had written letters of support. Speech, called Mrs. Abernathy, tapping her cane on the floor. Caroline raised her hands to quiet the room. I don't have fancy words, but I have a full heart. Thank you for believing in me. Laughter and applause filled the room as champagne corks popped and plates were passed. Caroline sank into her favorite booth, watching the celebration unfold. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed completely. It was over. She had won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges of actually running the business, but tonight was for joy. Days after the celebration, Caroline sat in her new office, still strange to call it hers, reviewing financial reports when Daniel burst through the door without knocking. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Caroline glanced up from the spreadsheets she'd been struggling to decipher. What's wrong? Lawton Investments just called. They're pulling their backing from the expansion project. And they're not the only ones. 3 other major investors have threatened to withdraw. Caroline set down her pen. That doesn't make sense. Everything was greenlit last week. Daniel handed her a tablet open to a business newsletter. The headline made her stomach drop. Pierce Restaurant Chain in Jeopardy. Incompetent management takes toll. The article quoted anonymous sources claiming Caroline had already fired experienced executives, planned to sell off profitable locations, and knew nothing about business fundamentals. None of it was true. Victor, Caroline whispered, recognizing the careful crafting of lies. This has his fingerprints all over it. We need to act fast, Daniel said. The board's called an emergency meeting. Caroline nodded, gathering her papers with trembling hands. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. The boardroom fell silent when Caroline entered. 8 faces turned toward her, most reflecting concern, a few showing outright skepticism. Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. These rumors are false, every one of them. The Bergman Group pulled out this morning, said Mr. Reynolds, the oldest board member. That's 10 million in financing gone. And this article mentions staff exodus, added another, tapping the printout. Is that true? Caroline shook her head. The only management changes have been those we agreed upon last week. No one's been fired. No properties are being sold. For 3 hours, Caroline answered questions, presented facts, and fought to maintain her composure while countering Victor's invisible attacks. By the end, she'd convinced them to delay any decisions until she could speak personally with each investor. The next day blurred into an endless marathon. Caroline met with financial analysts at dawn, investors at lunch, and reporters through the afternoon. She canceled dinner with Susan and Emma, working straight through with only coffee and determination keeping her upright. By day 3, she'd regained 2 investors' confidence, but lost another. Her phone never stopped ringing. She forgot to eat. The pressure squeezed her chest like a vice, but she pushed through it. You need to rest. Daniel insisted on the 4th evening as they left the office. This pace isn't sustainable. I can't stop now, Caroline replied. Not when we're making progress. At home that night, Caroline spread financial documents across her kitchen table. Her vision blurred as she reviewed contingency plans. The pressure in her chest had grown worse, a burning sensation spreading down her left arm. Just stress, she told herself. Just need to finish this section. When her phone rang, she reached for it with a hand that suddenly wouldn't cooperate. The room tilted sideways. Papers scattered as she knocked them from the table, trying to steady herself. Mom? Susan's voice called from the phone. Mom, are you there? Caroline tried to answer, but couldn't form words. The pain exploded across her chest like lightning. She knocked over her chair trying to stand, collapsing onto the linoleum floor. 10 minutes later, Susan used her spare key to enter after repeated unanswered calls. She found her mother curled on the kitchen floor, face gray, clutching her chest. Emma, she screamed toward the car where her daughter waited. Call 911, now. As the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, Caroline felt darkness closing in. Had she fought so hard to win, only to lose everything now? Caroline's eyes fluttered open to a ceiling of stark white tiles and the steady beep of machines. The familiar scent of disinfectant told her where she was before her vision fully cleared. A hospital. She tried to move but felt weighted down, as if gravity had doubled overnight. Mom? Susan's voice cracked with emotion. Thank God. Caroline turned her head slowly, wincing at the dull ache in her chest. Susan sat beside the bed, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her daughter's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. What happened? Caroline's voice came out as a rasp. Minor heart attack, Susan said, reaching for a plastic cup of water with a straw. The doctor says it was brought on by extreme stress and exhaustion. She held the straw to Caroline's lips. You haven't been eating or sleeping properly for days. Caroline took a small sip, the cool water soothing her parched throat. Outside the window, darkness had fallen. She couldn't tell if it was evening or early morning. How long have I been here? Almost 18 hours. Susan set the cup down and brushed a strand of gray hair from Caroline's forehead with gentle fingers. Emma just went to get us some real coffee. The cafeteria stuff is awful. Caroline closed her eyes briefly. The events before her collapsed, returning in fragments. The investors pulling out. The endless meetings. The mountain of papers on her kitchen table. The restaurants can wait, Susan interrupted firmly. Daniel called twice. He says everything's under control for now. Caroline started to protest, but stopped when she saw tears welling in Susan's eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. Susan's voice broke. I should have supported you from the beginning instead of questioning whether you could handle it. You were right to worry, Caroline whispered. No? Susan shook her head fiercely. I was wrong. So wrong. I let my own insecurities cloud everything. I've spent years trying to fit in with Robert's family, always worried about appearances and what people think. She wiped away a tear. And there you were, showing more strength and dignity than any of them. Caroline felt her own eyes grow damp. I never wanted you to feel ashamed of me. Never, Susan insisted, squeezing her hand again. I was the one who was blind. Mom, you raised me alone, working double shifts, never complaining. You put me through college when you barely had enough for yourself. Her voice steadied. If anyone can run those restaurants, it's you. Caroline turned to stare out the window at the night sky. A sliver of moon hung between patches of clouds. In that moment, the weight of everything crashed down on her, the court battle. Victor's sabotage. The constant questioning of her abilities. What if I can't? She whispered. What if this is a sign? A sign of what? That I'm in over my head. Maybe I was meant to serve people, not lead them. Caroline felt tears sliding down her cheeks. All those people depending on me. Their jobs, their families. What if I fail them all? Susan leaned closer, dabbing Caroline's tears with a tissue. Mom, you won't. Mr. Pierce believed in me, Caroline murmured, her voice growing fainter as fatigue pulled at her. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe I really am. Just a waitress. Her eyelids grew heavy as medication tugged her back toward sleep. Maybe I was never meant to run the restaurants after all, she whispered, the words barely audible as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her daughter's protests fading with her consciousness. Caroline drifted through the hazy landscape of dreams. The hospital sounds faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves. She found herself sitting on a wooden bench in the park where she and David used to walk every Sunday after church. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and coming rain. You always did worry too much, a familiar voice said. Caroline turned, her heart leaping. David sat beside her, looking just as he had before the illness took him strong, with laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. David, she whispered, reaching for his hand. It felt warm and solid in hers. I'm making a mess of everything. He smiled, the same gentle smile that had sustained her through their hardest times. Are you? Seems to me you're fighting pretty hard. I don't know what I'm doing, Caroline confessed. Running restaurants, dealing with investors, I'm just a waitress? David finished, shaking his head. Caro, you were never just anything. The park around them shifted, and suddenly they stood in the old Sunnyside Café, empty and bathed in golden afternoon light. David walked to the counter where a faded photograph hung their wedding day, both of them young and glowing. Remember what I told you the day you started at the cafe? When you were so worried about making ends meet after I got sick? Caroline nodded, the memory cleared despite the decades. You said I shouldn't worry about titles or what others thought. I said that it's not the uniform you wear, but the love you give, that defines you. David touched her cheek. That hasn't changed, Caro. You raised our daughter with dignity and love. You showed kindness to every person who walked through those doors, not because you wanted praise, but because that's who you are. He gestured around the Dream Cafe. Pierce saw that. He didn't leave you these restaurants because you know business. He left them because you know people. But what if I fail them? Then you fail. David shrugged. But you'll have tried with honor and kindness. That's all anyone can do. His eyes grew serious. Don't let that man take what's rightfully yours. Don't let him steal the gift Pierce meant for you. Caroline felt tears gathering. I miss you so much. I know. David's smile returned as he began to fade. But I've never really left you. Remember who you are, Caroline, not what they call you. The cafe dissolved into mist, and David's voice echoed one last time. It's the love you give. Caroline opened her eyes to the hospital room, now brightened by morning sunlight. The heaviness in her chest had lifted, replaced by a calm certainty. Susan sat dozing in the chair while Emma stood by the window, staring out at the day. They both turned at her movement. Grandma? Emma rushed to the bedside. How are you feeling? Better, Caroline said, surprised by the strength in her voice. Much better. Susan straightened, relief washing over her tired face. The doctor says with rest, you'll make a full recovery, but you need to take it easy. Caroline nodded, then slowly pushed herself up to sit straighter in the bed. I will rest, she said, but only enough to get back on my feet. We have work to do. Mom, the restaurants can wait. Not the restaurants. Our family. Our future. Caroline reached for both their hands. Victor thinks he can break me. Break us. He's counting on me giving up. Emma's eyes widened. What are you saying, Grandma? Caroline felt David's presence, like a warm hand, on her shoulder. When she spoke, her voice held no trace of doubt. I'm saying we can't let Victor win. Not now. Not ever. News of Caroline's collapse spread through the town like wildfire. By noon, every employee at every restaurant in Pierce's chain had heard that the woman they called Miss Caroline was in the hospital. Daniel, the young manager who had defended Caroline at the board meeting, paced outside her hospital room. When Susan emerged to get coffee, he approached with a determined look. How is she? Better, Susan replied, surprised to see him. The doctor says she needs rest. Daniel nodded, pulling out his phone. I've been texting with the other managers. We need to do something. Within hours, a simple hashtag appeared on social media. Heart of the Cafe. Employees shared stories of Caroline's kindness over the decades, how she had paid for a cook's son's school supplies when money was tight, covered shifts for a waitress with a sick child, or simply remembered every regular's order and life story. Marge, who had worked alongside Caroline for 20 years, posted a photo of them from 1998, arms around each other's shoulders. This woman taught me dignity when my husband left. She's the soul of Sunnyside. The movement grew organically. By evening, customers began adding their own stories. Ms. Caroline helped me study for my nursing exams every morning at 5 a.m. for 3 months straight. A heart of the café. When I lost my job, she accidentally gave me extra food every day until I got back on my feet. Never made me feel like charity, heart of the café. The next morning, lines formed outside every restaurant in the chain. Regular customers brought friends. Local news stations arrived with cameras. We're here to support Caroline Miller, a retired teacher told a reporter outside the original Sunnyside Cafe. This place has always been more than somewhere to eat. It's where community happens. That's because of her. In her hospital room, Caroline stared in disbelief at the tablet Emma held up, showing videos of packed restaurants and social media tributes. I don't understand, she whispered. You may not see your worth, Mom, Susan said, but everyone else does. Daniel knocked and entered, carrying flowers and a stack of cards. The lunch shift just called. We've never had a busier day. People are leaving extra tips to create a Caroline fund for your recovery. Emma's phone buzzed. She checked it and broke into a wide smile. Grandma, the local paper just published a feature about you. They're calling you the waitress with a heart of gold who fed a city for decades. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted attention. That's exactly why you deserve it, Daniel replied. The board members are seeing this too. 3 investors who are threatening to pull out have called to affirm their support. Across town, Victor Pierce slammed his coffee mug down on his marble kitchen counter, splattering liquid across the newspaper before him. The headline glared back, Community rallies behind beloved waitress turned owner. His attorney's voice crackled through the phone speaker. It's not looking good, Victor. The public sentiment is overwhelming. Even business associates who promised to help are backing away. Nobody wants to be seen opposing her now. This is ridiculous, Victor snapped. She's just an old waitress who apparently spent 40 years building goodwill that money can't buy, his lawyer replied dryly. We might need to consider a settlement. Victor crumpled the newspaper, but couldn't unsee the image of people lined up around the block at his uncle's flagship restaurant, many wearing hastily printed t-shirts with Caroline's smiling face and the words heart of the cafe beneath. The tide was turning, and for the first time, Victor felt it might sweep him away. Caroline adjusted her simple navy blazer outside the glass doors of Pierce Restaurant Group headquarters. Though she'd been discharged from the hospital only 3 days ago, she insisted on attending today's emergency board meeting in person. Susan had protested, but Caroline knew some battles required showing up. You sure you're ready? Daniel asked, holding the door. Caroline squared her shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be. The boardroom fell silent when she entered. 12 pairs of eyes followed her slow, deliberate walk to the empty chair at the head of the polished table. Her doctor would have preferred she rest another week, but the butterfly stitches at her temple and the slight pallor of her complexion would have to serve as testament to her dedication. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I believe we have important matters to discuss. Richard Holloway, the silver-haired CFO who had barely acknowledged her existence at previous meetings, cleared his throat. Mrs. Miller, before we begin, I think I speak for several of us when I say we owe you an apology. Caroline blinked in surprise. When Harlan named you his successor, I had reservations, Richard continued. I questioned what a career waitress could possibly know about running a restaurant chain. He slid a folder across the table toward her. These are the latest numbers since the Heart of the Cafe movement began. Customer traffic is up 47% across all locations. Employee retention has improved. We've had 16 inquiries about potential new locations. The marketing director, Melissa, jumped in. Our social media engagement has quadrupled. People aren't just coming for food anymore. They're coming for the experience, the community. They're coming because of what you represent. Caroline's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. One by one, board members who had once eyed her with skepticism now spoke with newfound respect. I've been in this business 30 years, said James, the operations director. I've never seen customer loyalty like this. They're not just supporting a restaurant, they're supporting you, Mrs. Miller. Caroline, she corrected gently. Please call me Caroline. The investor who had been most vocal about withdrawing his support leaned forward. I was wrong about you. What you lack in business school training, you more than make up for in something money can't buy: genuine connection with people. Harlan knew exactly what he was doing. Caroline felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with her recent health scare. Victor's attorney called this morning, the company lawyer announced. They're offering to drop all claims in exchange for a small settlement. They know they've lost the public relations battle. A spontaneous round of applause broke out around the table. So, Richard said with a smile that transformed his stern face, "What's your vision for the company, Caroline?" She took a deep breath. "I want our restaurants to be what they've always been, at their best places where everyone feels welcome, where good food comes with dignity and kindness. I want fair wages for our staff, community programs for those in need, and scholarship funds for employees pursuing education." Instead of dismissal, she saw nods of approval. "And I want to serve our regular Wednesday senior special for $7.99. Not the $9.99 you switched it to last year," she added with a smile. "Some of those folks count their pennies." The board laughed not at her, but with her. When the meeting concluded, Caroline walked out with her head held high, Daniel at her side. "How does it feel?" he asked. She smiled, thinking of her decades in an apron, the pride she'd always taken in her work despite the mockery. "It feels like being seen," she said simply. "Really seen." 3 days later, Caroline stood behind the counter at Sunnyside Café, pouring coffee for the morning regulars. She'd insisted on working a shift, partly to reassure herself that some things hadn't changed, and partly because she missed the rhythm of the place. Her apron felt like an old friend. The bell above the door jangled violently. Victor Pierce burst in, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face flushed with rage. He slammed a newspaper down on the counter, sending coffee sloshing from nearby cups. "You think you've won?" Victor's voice boomed through the suddenly silent cafe. "This puff piece about the waitress with a heart of gold is disgusting. You manipulated my uncle, and now you're manipulating the public." Caroline set down her coffee pot with a steady hand. Where once she might have trembled before such fury, she now felt a strange calm. "Good morning, Victor. Would you like some coffee?" Her politeness only enraged him further. "Don't patronize me. I know what you're doing. Those investors were mine until your little publicity stunt. This was supposed to be my inheritance." Customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Jenkins, a widow who'd been coming in for breakfast every day for 20 years, clutched her purse to her chest. 2 young businessmen at the counter exchanged worried glances. Caroline stepped around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood face to face with Victor, her voice low but firm. "Your uncle sat in that booth by the window every morning for 40 years. He built this business from nothing, and he wanted someone who understood its heart to carry it forward." Victor sneered. "Its heart? It's a business, not a charity case. And you're nothing but a glorified server who got lucky." A few gasps rose from the crowd. Caroline didn't flinch. "You know, I used to believe that," she said, "that I was just a waitress. But your uncle taught me something important. It's not what job you do that matters, it's how you do it." "Spare me the Hallmark card wisdom," Victor spat, stepping closer. "I'll still find a way to take this from you. I have connections you couldn't dream of." Caroline smiled sadly. "That's the difference between us, Victor. You see this place as something to take. I see it as something to give." "You pathetic." "That's enough." Daniel's voice cut through as he emerged from the back office. 2 security guards, a new addition since Caroline's hospitalization, appeared beside him. Victor laughed bitterly. "Security? For a cafe? How the mighty have fallen. These gentlemen work for Pierce Restaurant Group," Caroline explained calmly, "and I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. You can't throw me out. My name is on the building." "Not anymore," Daniel said, producing papers from his jacket. "The board voted yesterday to officially rename the parent company to Sunnyside Restaurant Group. Your uncle's wishes, apparently. It was in his personal papers." Victor's face drained of color. The security guards each took one of his arms. "This isn't over," he hissed as they guided him toward the door. Caroline adjusted her apron. "Actually, Victor, I think it island." As the door closed behind him, the cafe erupted in applause. Mrs. Jenkins stood up and hugged Caroline. The businessmen raised their coffee mugs in salute. "Your coffee's getting cold, everyone," Caroline said with a warm smile, picking up her pot again. But for once, she allowed herself to bask in the moment before returning to work. Caroline adjusted the microphone nervously, looking out at the sea of faces filling the hotel conference room. Over 200 employees from all 22 restaurants sat waiting for her first official address as owner. Her hand trembled slightly as she smoothed her navy blazer, a gift from Susan, who had insisted she dressed the part. Beneath it, she wore her favorite blouse, the one with tiny embroidered flowers along the collar. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Thank you for coming today. I know some of you traveled quite a distance." She paused, searching for Daniel's encouraging smile in the front row. Finding it, she continued. 6 weeks ago, I was taking orders and refilling coffee cups. Today, I'm standing before you as the owner of this company. She chuckled softly. Life has a funny way of surprising us. A warm ripple of laughter spread through the room. Mr. Pierce Harlan believed in the power of kindness. He built these restaurants not just as businesses, but as community gathering places. I want to honor that legacy and expand upon it. Caroline flipped to her notes, though she hardly needed them. These ideas had kept her awake for nights. First, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Harlan Pierce Memorial Scholarship Fund. Each year, we'll provide college tuition assistance to 5 children of our employees. Surprised murmurs and scattered applause follow. Second, we're implementing an emergency assistance program for staff facing unexpected hardships, medical bills, housing emergencies, family crises. I've been there. I know what it means to worry about making rent while serving others with a smile. A woman in the third row wiped away tears. Third, every location will now host monthly community dinners where anyone can eat for free, no questions asked. These will be funded by the company, not by your tips or wages. The applause grew louder. And finally, Caroline's voice softened. We're increasing wages across the board by 15%, effective immediately. The room erupted. People leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering. Someone started chanting her name. Caroline blinked back tears, overwhelmed by their response. When the noise finally settled, she leaned into the microphone one last time. I'm still learning this business. I'll make mistakes, but I promise you this, I will never forget what it feels like to stand on your feet for an 8-hour shift. I will never forget what it means to depend on tips to pay your bills, and I will never, ever forget that without you, there is no sunny side. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Hours later, after handshakes and hugs and countless conversations, Caroline found herself alone in the empty conference room. The hotel staff had already cleared away the coffee cups and name badges. Only her folder remained on the podium. She walked slowly to the large windows overlooking the city. The afternoon sun painted the buildings in soft gold. Somewhere out there was the little apartment where she'd raised Susan alone, counting pennies and working double shifts. Somewhere was the booth, where Harlan had sat every morning for 40 years, watching her pour coffee and greet customers by name. Caroline pressed her palm against the cool glass. I hope I'm doing right by you, Harlan, she whispered. A profound sense of peace washed over her, not the giddy excitement of victory or the nervous energy of new beginnings, but something deeper. A quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She gathered her things, switched off the lights, and closed the door gently behind her, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The Sunnyside Café glowed under thousands of fairy lights. Caroline had insisted on transforming the original restaurant for Emma's wedding reception, rather than using one of the more upscale locations. This was where it all began, where she'd poured coffee for 4 decades, where she'd wiped tables while dreaming of a better future for Susan and later Emma. Tonight, the humble cafe looked magical. White roses and baby's breath adorned every table. The counter where Caroline had stood countless mornings now displayed a 5-tier wedding cake. A small dance floor replaced the usual cluster of tables by the window. Emma, radiant in her ivory gown, twirled across the room greeting guests. Her new husband followed, his eyes never leaving her. Caroline watched from a corner table, her heart so full it ached. Mom? Susan approached, elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress. It's time for the speeches. Caroline nodded, smoothing her silver blue dress, the finest she'd ever owned. The transformation in her daughter over these past months had been as remarkable as her own. The wall of status and expectation between them had crumbled, replaced by something stronger. The room quieted as Susan took the microphone. Her voice wavered slightly. When I was growing up, I watched my mother rise at 5 every morning to serve others. She'd come home with aching feet, but never complained. Susan's eyes found Caroline's. For years, I was embarrassed that my mother was just a waitress. I wanted her to be more, to have titles and degrees and things that seemed important. Tears glistened in Susan's eyes, but Mom was already everything that mattered. She showed up. Every day, through grief and hardship, she showed up. Not just for me, but for every person who walked through those cafe doors. Caroline pressed her handkerchief to her eyes. When life handed Mom this unexpected inheritance, many doubted her, including me. Susan's voice broke. I was wrong. The strength she's shown these past months was always there, behind that apron and gentle smile. Mom, you've taught me that dignity isn't found in titles, but in how we treat others. Emma and I are the women we are because of you. The room erupted in applause. Emma rushed to embrace her mother and grandmother, the 3 generations of Miller women holding each other tight. Caroline stood slowly as the applause faded. Her legs felt unsteady as she made her way to the microphone. She looked around the room at employees who had become family, at customers who had become friends, at the people who had once mocked her, now watching with respectful attention. "Thank you, Susan." She cleared her throat. "I never expected to be standing here like this. For 40 years, I carried trays and took orders. People sometimes looked through me, as if I wasn't worth seeing." The room was utterly silent, but every cup of coffee I poured mattered. Every smile I gave mattered. When you do anything with love, whether running a company or sweeping floors, that work has dignity. Caroline found Emma's beaming face in the crowd. "To my beautiful granddaughter and her wonderful husband, may you always know that your worth isn't in what you do, but in how you love each other and those around you." She raised her glass. "And to all of you who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, thank you for teaching this old waitress that it's never too late for new beginnings." Her restaurant filled with thunderous applause as Caroline stood tall, no longer just a waitress, but always proudly the woman who had served with dignity and love. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Caroline pulled into her usual parking spot behind Sunnyside Café. The morning after Emma's wedding, she could have slept in or let the morning staff handle opening. After all, she owned the place now, owned all 22 restaurants in the chain. But some rhythms of life were sacred. She unlocked the back door, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee beans and fresh bread. Caroline hung her purse on the hook that had held her belongings for 4 decades, right next to the employee schedule she still wrote out by hand each week. The kitchen staff looked up in surprise as she entered. "Mrs. Miller, didn't expect you today after the big wedding," said Miguel, the head cook who'd worked alongside her for 15 years. Caroline smiled, pulling her apron from the hook. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." She tied it around her waist with practiced ease, the motion as natural as breathing. She ran her fingers over the embroidered Caroline on the pocket thread worn thin from years of washing. When the board had suggested custom uniforms with the company logo, she'd insisted this tradition remain untouched. Every employee still had their name stitched by hand. The morning routine unfolded like a well-rehearsed dance. Caroline brewed the first pot of coffee, arranged the pastries in the display case, and wiped down the counter until it gleamed. By the time she flipped the sign to open, a small line had already formed outside. First through the door was Harold Jenkins, 83 years old and punctual as a Swiss watch. "Morning, Caroline." He tipped his worn cap. "Heard your granddaughter's wedding was something special." "Good morning, Harold. Coffee's hot and fresh." She poured his cup without asking how he took it black with 1 sugar. "The wedding was beautiful. I have pictures to show you tomorrow." One by one, the regulars filed in. They greeted her not as the owner of a restaurant empire, but as Caroline, the woman who remembered their children's names, who kept track of their anniversaries, who knew which booth they preferred. "Busy morning," called Susan, surprising Caroline as she swept through the door around 9. Her daughter wore casual clothes instead of her usual tailored suit. "What are you doing here?" Caroline asked, sliding a plate of eggs to a customer. Susan grabbed an apron from the hook. "Thought I might help out. It's been years since I waited tables with you during high school." Caroline's heart swelled as she watched her daughter greet customers and take orders, no longer embarrassed by the work her mother had done for a lifetime. By mid-morning, Emma and her new husband stopped in, still glowing with newlywed happiness. They squeezed into a booth, accepting coffee from Susan and breakfast specials from Caroline. "Grandma, aren't you supposed to be in some corporate office now?" Emma teased. Caroline laughed. "I have meetings this afternoon. But mornings? Mornings belong to the café." She paused by the window, watching sunlight stream across the worn linoleum floor. The light caught the diamond-like sparkle of clean countertops, the steam rising from fresh coffee, the smiles on familiar faces. In one corner, Daniel from corporate reviewed quarterly numbers. At the counter, Harold shared stories with younger customers. Susan efficiently balanced 3 plates on her arm, a skill Caroline had taught her long ago. Caroline touched her apron, feeling the familiar weight of the pockets fill with order pads and pens. The empire she now ran might span cities, but her heart would always be here, in this room, with these people. "Some things never change," she whispered to herself as sunlight warmed her face. "And that's the best part." If you enjoyed the story of Caroline Miller, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.